Welcome to Rhythm, Bass, and Place in the Director's Chair featuring Kristian Hill and his film, God Said Give 'Em Drum Machines. Today's program is part of CCCADI's 5-month series celebrating the circulations and migration of Black music and social spaces entitled Rhythm, Bass, and Place Connections and Reflections on Music of the African Diaspora. My name is Sabine Blazin. I am the Director of Programs here at CADI, and our mission is dedicated to advancing cultural equity, racial and social justice for African descendant communities through arts, culture, education, and media. CADI's work is critical to empowering our communities, and I invite you to support our 45 plus year legacy by making a gift of any amount today. Our strength is in our numbers and our solidarity to one another. So, no matter how small or large your contribution, know that you're making a lasting impact. Simply click the donate button at cccadi.org. Thank you, and I would like to now hand it over to Lynnée Denise, our amazing curator for our Rhythm, Bass, and Play series, who will moderate today's conversation and introduce our guest panelists.
Hello, hello, and thank you so much, Sabine. It is a pleasure to be here and to have been invited to help curate this program. And we are really entering an amazing sort of end of the program as we have another 2 months to kind of see through some really amazing talks, sounds, and just sort of ideas floating around music. Again, my name is DJ Lynnée Denise, and you are tuned in to one of the programs of Rhythm, Bass, and Place, the director's chair. Rhythm, Bass, and Place will explore ideas on gender, sexuality, race, and technology, and the making of multisensory music in a diasporic context. Through virtual as well as in person curated conversations, screenings, and performances, we'll highlight the routes and evolution of music throughout the African diaspora. Black music is multi regional, multi dimensional, and multi rhythmic. It has been defined by the characteristics of Black social spaces and is a cultural reflection of our people's connection with spirituality, community, nature, circumstance, emotion, and society. There is no better film, perhaps, than thinking about regional rhythms, technology and emotion, race and musical thought than techno. I am so super excited to be in conversation with an amazing director and general amazing Detroit thinker. That is Kristian Hill, who is responsible for directing, I think, one of the most important films about techno, God Said Give 'Em Drums. It is important because it is one of the first films about techno that was directed by Black folks from Detroit. Kristian Hill, I would like to welcome you and sit you down in this director's chair and pick your mind. What's up?
What's up? How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good, family. It is so great to see you. Um, I am so happy that you have the time and agreed to do this, considering the fact that house and techno are now experiencing this kind of, I don't even want to call it a resurgence as much as an emergence of the Black roots of, electronic music, but dance music in particular. And you had the foresight to do this ahead of the game. So you actually have the text that people are referring to now when they're kind of scrambling to learn about these Black roots. Please tell me about your process. Like, how long had you been thinking about this film? I know it's a labor of love. Like, where did the very idea of doing a film on Detroit techno, which is redundant, on techno, come to mind?
You know, I growing up in Detroit, I didn't really have a connection to storytelling or filmmaking, but I did have a connection to this community of DJs and this community of artists. And so over time, as I became more confident in my skill set as an editor and filmmaker, um, you know, I was hanging out one night at at an art gallery in Detroit, Johansson Gallery, which is now closed. It was run by a friend of mine named Kevin Hansen. But at this party, you would have, Piranha Head, Derek May. You would have all these people kind of just around hanging out. And that night I ran into my partner, filmmaking partner, Jennifer Washington. And at this party, she and I, who we knew each other in LA, but we didn't hang or have, we just knew we were both from Detroit. So at this party, we link up and we get to talking, and she tells me the story about how she went to Submerge earlier that day and went to Exhibit 3000, which is considered the first techno museum to document or kind of display Detroit's origins in terms of creating techno music, and kind of all of the gentlemen and women who participated in making this movement a worldwide movement. This museum set up inside of Submerge, which is really like on one floor, and they have all the machines and stuff in glass cases. She was telling me how she went and saw this, and I was fascinated by that. But in our conversation, I said, well, I know them dudes. Like, I grew up with Juan Atkins as a child. He grew up around the block from me. Of course, I've known Eddie Fowlkes since high school. Just these are people who kind of I had like a firsthand connection with, but really didn't totally understand the impact that they had on dance music.
Mm-hmm. That's great for so many reasons. I am happy to say that I had a chance to go to Submerge randomly through Invincible, the rapper from Michigan, who knew that, and this was back in like 2013, who knew that I was like a student of, yes, Detroit techno, but Detroit period as a city is a lesson. And I've been a student of Detroit for decades now, and so Mike Banks came downstairs and was like, because Underground Resistance is based in the space, right? And was like, oh, you're interested in, right? Like, what's up, right? Again, this is before the Sever. This is, hey,
Sorry,
we can
sorry
make
about that.
okay. Listen, the ghost in the machine wanted to speak, no problem. But so yeah, yes, longtime listener of Detroit music, although I didn't come to techno in the 80s. I didn't come to techno until like the 2000s, and then I went back to the 80s to hear Detroit. Were you listening to techno in the 80s? And if not, and if you were, what other forms of music were you listening to in Detroit in the 80s?
So, around 81, 82, you start to hear Cosmic Car. And then you hear also by a number of names, Charivari. There's like these songs that are coming from the Detroit kind of underground that you're hearing on Mojo, who was at the time working for WGPR, which was the first Black television and radio station in Detroit. So this music, just early on, you're hearing it, and then you're hearing, of course, Cybertron's evolution, right? And then you're hearing, Clear, R9, which was my favorite, right? Which was the B-side, and that was on Fantasy Records, which was a label out of the Bay. So you were actually hearing Detroit music, but now it was coming through other channels that you didn't even know. Had I not known that, Juan, I would have never known that Cybertron was really a group of local musicians. I probably would have looked at them in the vein that we look at Kraftwerk, or do you look at some of the music that was coming from Europe? So growing up, kind of hearing this music, and you know, when I went to college and Big Fun came out, like of course we remember, I remember, forgive me, Strings of Life. Like that was like a big record. However, it was one of those Detroit records that you would hear with the pitch maybe at +6, you know what I mean? Or +8 is flying. So there's all of this kind of like taking this sound, and people are still trying to make it make sense, lack of a better term, you know. But once Kevin came with Big Fun and Good Life, I remember being in Baltimore at that time at Morgan State. And I would say to people, this music is from Detroit. This is techno music. And they would be like, man, get out of here. That's house music. That's from Chicago. Who is that? That could be from New York. So let's say 88, 89, the world, and particularly like you had to really be tied into Black culture to understand that there was a scene in Detroit and music was coming out of it that would sound house or would sound like New York club or garage at the time, you know. So yeah, I was listening to the music, but in terms of it being like techno, people weren't ready to hear that, and you still had yet to have the big wave from Europe where techno it then takes off, which is in like the early to mid 90s.
So shout out to the Midwest, you know, and I guess part of that denial that Detroit had its own electronic music sound can be linked to the current confusion about the Black roots of techno, right? It's like cats have for decades been like, nah, that's not, no, that's right. And then everything gets umbrellaed under the term house or techno without understanding each city, right, was creating its own energy, although they were feeding off of each other. But that helps me get into the next clip for several reasons. A, I love how you broke down the role of radio and electrifying mojo, right, and like shaping the ears of these DJs who then create techno, or even shaping your ear of someone who then becomes a documentarian of techno. But also, before we get into this Greg Tate clip where he breaks down the sort of musical genealogies of Detroit and thinks through migration, I also want to shout out Prince, right? The role that Prince played in the making of techno because of what Mojo was doing with entire Prince albums, right? So that's super exciting. Let us hear from Greg Tate with this clip as he breaks down just the history and the musical minds of Detroiters.
I think you have to talk about the trajectory of Black American culture in general, and then move into the Detroit focus. Of course, we know about the Great Migration from the South, from that terrorism into the industrial North.
Black people in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, they already had some incentives to be leaving the South, given the Ku Klux Klan, all the night riders down there, the general menace of Jim Crow. When Henry Ford put out that $5 a day, when they heard that, it spread all over the country.
From the end of the Civil War through the 20s, to the 40s, you know. And then all these music cultures that flourished there right in the heart of the country. In New York, we had big bands, swing. Chicago's giving us blues. We got the great jazz tradition, Louis Armstrong, King Oliver. And then Detroit, you know, is as much a hub for all these genres. You know, I mean, you got major innovative players coming to Alice Coltrane, Yusef Lateef, the Jones Brothers, Elvin played with Coltrane, and Thad, very key in terms of the jazz. And then you got this great gospel tradition there, of course. The Reefers out of there, you know, the Clark sisters. And then, of course, there's Motown.
From Michigan's Motor Town, a new export, the Detroit sound. Their formula, a strong gospel and blues feeling with a heavy rocking beat.
Amazing. And also, shout out to one of our ministers of music, Dr. Greg Tate, without a formal degree, who is no longer with us. And thank you for capturing him talking about Detroit.
That was Greg Tate's gift to me in terms of coming to talk to me was something that I couldn't, like, just imagine calling somebody to, hey, would you like to be in my film? And not only does he say, sure, he comes to meet me at, we did that at CUNY in New York, in Harlem. And after that, I would kind of tell him, hey, I'm going to send you a cut. I would send you, give me some notes. And, we even had dinner one night. And I was like, yeah, man, it's just not, my story not coming together. Around the time that I was reaching out to you, like, I'm just having trouble trying to get the story. And, just not too much longer after that, he passed. And it was like, I never got a chance to kind of share with him kind of how far I'd come, and I'm just fortunate enough that he took the time to talk to me without any like resume or any, it's just based on, of course, Dream's connection, Dream Hampton's connection, who I've known since high school, and her belief in what I was doing. So those things made it so that he came to talk to me without any preconceived knowledge of even my skill set. He just showed up, and I appreciate him. I try to figure out ways to thank him and celebrate him, but I did my best by making sure he's in this piece,
Oh, I think that's beyond the best. He's immortal now, right? And in fact, teaching this film means teaching Greg Tate, right? And so he's immortal. That's the thing, is that you documented us, you documented him, right? So like we have him as a treasure in an archive. And also full circle, Dream introduced me to Greg Tate, Dream introduced me to you, Dream introduced you to me, right? Like, so Dream as this dream catcher, this network, this network goddess, like
and not to go too far down the road with Dream, but I also say she introduced me to Invincible, who you brought up earlier, right? Invincible was working with the Detroit Narrative Agency. So the Detroit Narrative Agency was one of the first organizations to come on and help us and put us in positions where we could get in the film independent, that we could do Good Pitch Detroit. And we basically went to pitch our film, and at Good Pitch Detroit, we were one of the top pitches. And it was that pitch that got us into Kickstarter. And we did the Kickstarter, and we raised $30,000 towards the film, and PBS gave us 10,000 POV. So then that put us at like 40,000. So like Dream, Invincible, Detroit Narrative Agency, like these kind of alliances connect us to actual people who want to help us. You know what I'm saying? And I never, Invincible and Dream, they played a role like a lot of people, but in particular, their roles helped us get so much further down the road to actually this film being completed. And it took 12 years to make. So you have a lot of these type of relationships, you know.
That's an important point, and I do want to just like lift up both of them, because they have put a lot of money in the hands of artists, certainly in Detroit, but just nationally, you know. I'm not even going to plug my book at all, but I'm just going to say that Dream played an incredible role and helping to connect me with the press who published my first book, right? I'm not even, because it's not even about what the book is, and it's not, that's not the point. The larger point is this interesting way that, like, you know, Detroiters teach us about, you know, collectives and like sort of like underground world building and sort of yeah, underground resistance movements, right? So let me ask you though, what were you thinking about during the pre-production phase of the film? Like, what were some of the questions you had in your mind when you entered pre-production?
A lot of my early stuff was clouded by ego, and ego of like thinking I knew the history. So early on, I was really trying to show how there's this teenage dance club community that I'm kind of from, and my brothers kind of we're from, how they played a role in impacting techno, right? And you know, I didn't so much know about it's Juan and my man. His name is slipping me right now, and I should be shot for it. But early Cybertron, there was like I kind of knew Juan, but I didn't know this other history about the band and how really Juan was a part of the band. He wasn't. He was kind of the young guy who had some sound ideas that made this relationship kind of work. So early on, I was seeing the kind of really just the heterosexual line to techno, right? And not only and was trying to prove it. So I not only was like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm trying to prove, right? And early on, John Collins from Underground Resistance, we were, you know, I would say early on, we were thinking about working with him and working with them. And the fact that I'm an editor, I'm a shooter, you know, my ego at that point was like, why I need to listen to him, right? But he was trying to tell me about the real history, right? Just, you know, like, hey, man, this comes from the gay subculture and in Detroit. And it's not all about Ken. And just, he was kind of like the first person to be like, hey, man, you gotta listen to people, and you gotta be open for other storylines and ideas about how this music came about. And you know, for a minute, you know, I didn't even listen to them. You know, it was just about kind of what I knew. And yeah, just over time, I had to come to seeing Ken not as just kind of the DJ that played for the preppy parties, the teenage parties, but actually Ken had a story that connected to the origins of this music and connecting to Frankie Knuckles, and how that connection, even though Ken was older, how that played a role in the evolution of Detroit dance music. And so, you know, early on, I really had to, I would say it almost took like 5 years for me to understand that, like, we had to deal with the sexuality portions of it. And both my partner and I early on was like, we don't want to deal with that. We was like trying to tell the Stacey Hill story. And you're trying to tell the Stacey Hill story within this pocket of techno. And it's like, well, Stacey, she's the godmother of house. She's this. But yes, she played those early records. But then you're like, well, how do I put her evolution in this context. And it was those type of things that made me have to kind of like figure out how the underground community, how they actually connected to this music. And that's the story, you know, about how this subculture, as Eddie says, it was taboo, you know, but it was so taboo that they had to keep going, and they had to kind of learn more from this culture, whether their sexuality played a role in it or not. So yeah, it was something that I just had to kind of step back and get to the point and been like, this is the way. It's almost like this triangle of Chicago, New York, Detroit, and the connections that are happening between these hubs. Almost not like Cleveland or any of these other places weren't exciting. It's just as it relates to dance music, the triangle between Detroit, New York, and Chicago, and the triangle between these communities in New York, and these communities in Chicago, and with Ken cementing the community in Detroit to a certain degree. It's like I had to kind of then shift my story to reflect that. And
yeah, because also that too is a part of the Detroit narrative, right? And I appreciate that the Detroit narrative is about empowering voices that don't get the access, resources, and privilege that comes with representing Detroit. So that's dope to use that access you had. And thank you for being vulnerable, right? And talking about your ego and talking about the struggle, because we need to hear that kind of honest reflection when it comes to creating these massive projects, that you are a human being who was struggling with, like, how to tell this story and how to include Black sexuality, right? Like, and diversity in general. So we are going to hear from Greg again, to give us a little more context, right? When we think about techno, and we think about technology, and we think about techno poetics, and we think about Black folks as technology, and we think about the role of technology in, Detroit in terms of, the sort of conveyor belt assembly line approach to music that folks like Motown had. It's important to think about things like how the hell God did give them drum machines. Who taught them how to use drum machines? Where did the drum machines come from? At what point did Black folks start messing with drum machines and synthesizers, right? So Greg Tate is going to give us a little context about how electronic music is emerging and sort of formed and born.
Miles Davis said in the early 70s, he said he really thought the future of music was going to be centered around the drum. So he knew there was going to be this synthesis coming with drum, the ancient ancestral drum, new technology.
You may remember this. It's programmable, has a built-in rhythm box, and costs about £30.
When home recording technology and home production technology came online, cats in Detroit, the Bronx, and Brooklyn just leaped on it. It's like a new mode for making music that was cost effective.
Very funky.
In the DJ culture of Chicago, with Frankie Knuckles, and hip hop, starts to come online in New York. So you have a whole new generation that is finding their voice through this new technology. First the turntables, and then sequencers, and first drum machines coming out of Japan.
It's a cassette player recorder with a 3-channel keyboard. It's a house rock.
These things that are looked upon as toys, they're using them to create a whole new, several kind of new aesthetics at the same time. Hip hop, house, what became known as techno. This is all simultaneous development. So it really tells you that this is the way a generation is going to define itself. Juan Atkins is really the spark plug, the pioneer in terms of showing the way.
Oh, so yeah, right? So very funky. That part always makes me laugh. But so important to think about and to hear the words house and techno next to hip hop, right? Because for so long, hip hop has been a Black musical darling, right? And like, even though these other forms of music, diasporically, I'm thinking of like dance hall in Jamaica, I'm thinking of Kwaito music in South Africa, I'm thinking of, a kind of, what do you call that? Like electro funk in on the West Coast with Egyptian Lover, and right, that these technology obsessed, which is what Louis Chusoki refers to it as, are about, as Greg says, kind of claiming a sound, from a new generation. It is the decision to kind of use these machines, possibly given to us by God, right, to kind of forge a place at the height of the Reagan era, at the height of Margaret Thatcher's rule in London. So that's amazing. But see, the thing is like we've gotten ahead of the game, because I was going to ask you about this trilogy, right? This trilogy that you talked about, Paradise Garage, Chicago, Chicago's Ron Hardy stuff, and then also Detroit. But so now we're just gonna go straight into that clip, because you've given us context and having us think about that trilogy. So do you mind us just kind of going straight there so that we can keep folks in that conversation to see how the communities were in this kind of sonic communing?
Please, let's do it.
Let's do it.
I'm in Chicago every week, passing out records. Derek introduced me to all the different distributors. Hear Frankie, Ron Hardy.
After these records were out, we were driving to Chicago on a regular basis to go and hear Ron. Something about Ron Hardy, I just adapted. It's like just a trickle of sweat just got in my own DNA from him. And it just changed me, man. As much as I love Frankie, Frankie wasn't no Ronnie. I can say that loudly and proudly. And I know every Chicago artist and DJ there understands what I'm talking about. If you went to hear Ron, if you went to those little sweaty, nasty, hole-in-the-wall places, if you were there and you saw a big girl dancing in the corner with her boots, or you saw my man sweating it up, dancing like he was fighting, or you saw the dude that was like 200 pounds, muscle-bound, that was like tossing another dude up in the air, it was life-changing. It was gay, it was straight, it was black, very black, and it was just beautiful.
It was gay, it was black, it was very beautiful. I just realized with Derek May saying that, and hilarious that he talked about the twinkle of sweat from Ron Hardy that got in his blood, which reinforces the gay roots of, but whatever. But that's just a funny metaphor. But no, but it was gay, it was straight, it was black, is what he says, right? And I can't think of any other form of music where that sentence can be said. I can't even think of, like, I'm thinking, of course, black and gay, of course, gay and straight folks have always been partying together, but that explicit, very specifically, straight folks coming to queer spaces, right? Like, is amazing. And so I'm so glad that you captured that, and you captured it well. That story.
That makes you think in hip hop when they say, white people are guests in hip hop. Mm-hmm. It's almost like sometimes straight people are guests in dance music, and sometimes you have to figure out your role. As The Rock would say, you got to figure out your role, jabroni. You know what I mean? It's a situation where we had to grow to that. Like it wasn't like early on, it was almost like we was scared to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And then it just got to the point that like the more that we were like, this film has to speak to broader audiences, is when like these Ron Hardy stories and these stories of kind of people having to like humanize or kind of whatever they're thinking, you have to pull that back, because in order to learn what you need to learn and meet these people and be in these situations, you kind of have to be open and be more, you know what I mean? It's like, again, like I said it earlier, like when Eddie says back then it was taboo. And like in Detroit, like, you know, you kind of hear stories about, like, you know, these closeted men, what they had to endure, right? And you just like, damn, you know. So in telling the story of Detroit dance music, I could at least go in that direction, and not like, I could see now, looking back on it, I see why John Collins was like, bro, you don't have your handle on the story. And I could it took us, between me and him, it took us 10, 12 years for me to finally be like, hey man, I get it now. And he was like, man, if you would just listen to me then. But if I listened to you then, it's not my film. If I would listen to you then, it's your film. You, like, bro, and like the ego of it all, it's like, really, I made a film for Detroit. But it took a while for me to and my partner, it took us whiles to learn in this space of documentary filmmaking that you got to have impact, and your impact can't be shrouded in your career growth. The impact has to be for the community. The impact has to push this narrative along further. So it took time for me to, as a filmmaker, to kind of figure out how to celebrate a community that I'm not necessarily a part of. But when when I'm hanging out, I'm open to go to any spaces. And so with that point of view, you know, the story, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, that was part of just like figuring out this whole story and being fair. You know?
Yeah, but like you said, but you know what's interesting, this idea of straight folks being guests, like white folks are, you know, guests to hip hop, is also interesting, because speaking of Dream, because I actually had a chance to spend some time with her last month, and she said something that blew my mind, right? Like, I'm actually not going to refer to techno as having queer roots. I mean, obviously it's about, you know, what those DJs, who those DJs were studying, how they were listening to folks, and they were in these gay spaces, of course, right? But she reminds me that, you know, techno at the core is about a post-human experience, right? Like that it becomes its own thing, right? That whatever we, you know, Octavia Butler has this God of change sort of scripture that she writes in her book Parable of the Sower, where she says, like, everything that you know, God is change. Everything that you touch changes you, right? Everything that you touch changes, right? So I think the techno is an iteration of a Detroit sound influenced by different things. But I want to go on the record of saying I do believe it is its own entity, you know, like, because that idea of, because one of the things that I was trying to get at, and as a matter of fact, this helps me ask you two questions and helps us sort of get into the next clip, is just like, I was ready to come for techno because I realized that one of the distinctions between Detroit techno and Chicago house is the removal of women's voices, right? And so Dream was like, yeah, it's the removal of human voices. And I was like, damn, this is true. This is true. I mean, she absolutely understands as a kind of hypermasculine sonic project, of course. But
that's like, Juan's voice is a big part of the early Cybertron records. Juan and Rick Davis, right? That was the name that I was forgetting. And Rick's influence on this isn't sexual at all. Like, his influence is straight, you know, musically and sonically. So his relationship in that Cybertron thing, there were voices. And if you look at Kevin, he was using voices because he was actually trying to, how would you say, make it into pop culture and make bigger things. And he used his wives, girlfriends, like they were all like singers on some of these early records, you know. Paris is from Chicago, and she was a dance music kind of legend in her own right before hooking up with Kevin.
The vocalist for Inner City, but what's the song?
Yes.
Inner Life, Inner City. Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's true. But were they manipulating the voices? I mean, and not Kevin, you're right in terms of his, and he talks about in the film how he wanted to have a more commercial sound. And so of course that also, that's interesting that it does include women's voices. But when I think of like clear, when I do hear these like manipulated, mechanical voices. Not all the time, but it still is interesting. You know what I mean? But like there's a tech, like a techno, I'm about to make this word up, a technonization process where those voices are manipulated because they're playing with those machines that God gave them. But maybe not all the time. Now you're gonna make me go back and do a deep.
I've heard a story, a gentleman by the name of Doug Craig. He and Juan made a record called Technicolor. In the story, Juan, Doug says that Juan told him to like, hey man, if you're going to say those words, I need you to say them like you German, or say them like that, that don't say them in your regular voice. Say them like you're German and Kraftwerk. So this hyper masculization that you're talking about, yes, it is kind of the voice of the computer.
Exactly.
And it's those records like Strings of Life and things of that nature that don't have any vocals, right?
Which I love so much.
Yeah, but those are things that kind of that speak to your earlier point where there is no voice, there's no human kind of there's no human connection outside of the music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just sonically touching
right.
The voice it's pulling you in,
Totally. And it's this post-human thing. So let me ask you then, to get us into this next clip. It's a weird way to enter the next clip because I do want to segue into this and zero in on Chicago. But I've seen a number of documentaries on techno. Yeah. What makes your documentary different from the many documentaries on techno? Like what makes your approach different? What creates a signature? What makes yours stand out?
I mean, I'm from 7 Mile. 7 Mile in Detroit.
Period.
So like by right, the record store where everybody around town found these records was 5 blocks from my house. You know what I mean? Like Daryl Shannon, who's one of the seminal DJs of this culture, grew up in my neighborhood. Like Al Esther, whose voice you hear, I've known him since I was, he hung out with my brother. They would do my brother's parties. Like there are 2 DJs in there, Al Esther and Steve Dunbar. They did my 8th grade graduation party. You know what I mean? Like, so I've been around this world. So I don't know no other filmmakers who grew up in this culture.
That's right? It.
And not only did I grow up in this culture, like these people that are in my film, good, bad, or ugly, I still talk to. Like, and have to communicate with on a, if not a weekly, like I have to communicate with these people. Like Delano Smith, who right now is they're doing fundraisers around the world for this man.
Yeah.
To raise $250,000 for his health care. Do you know this man? They've raised close to $125,000 in less than a month for this man. So like I had to write him a letter to be in the film. And it hurt that I had to pull him back, right? And this is prior to me knowing what would happen today and things of that nature. But Delano is somebody who I love. He's somebody who like I look at him as like the purest connection from Ken, right? So he's who Ken would call boy genius. So these people are they're my friends. And so I don't know any other filmmaker who in this space of dance music who has taken their relationships and put them on the screen in the way that we have. Good, bad, and ugly.
I heard you say that.
Yeah, because
this
is a human story about how I believe, or we believe in Detroiters, how this music came about. And,
no, let me just say this. First of all, thank you for even saying Delano Smith's name right now. And just for folks who are watching, Google Delano's name and perhaps donate to the cause. Not because, like this is a charity fundraising event, but because this is about monies owed to Detroit. Like we're talking about the EDM festival circuit being a multi-billion-dollar industry off of the backs of what was created on the South Side in 7 Mile, right? On the South Side of Chicago, on the 7 Mile in Detroit. Like, give us that money back if you don't mind. But thank you for people's generosity. That's great. But I also believe that this is a kind of reparations, because my question is, would we have struggled with clean water in Flint had Michigan received the monies owed from this massive resource called Techno, right? Like as an import. But so I just wanted to say that. But I also want to ask you something about Chicago so we can go into this next clip. Because, in the film, we learned that it's Detroiters who put drum machines in Chicago, right? Or part of, right? The folks who were introducing drum machines to Chicago. So do you want to at all, like, just give us like a 1-minute introduction of the Chicago clip that helps us understand the role of Chicago in the film?
Well, I just want to say, because I'm not sure which clip we're playing right now, and forgive me, but I will say that like these machines at the time, just because of they were not being looked at as the first line of instrumentation. As a matter of fact, you will find a lot of this stuff either in pawn shops, or people were using credit card scams and stuff to get them, right? And so these credit card scams basically allowed Detroiters on some level, some of these guys in the film, allowed them to have a bunch of drum machines that they would be traveling selling. And some people say Chippy got his 909 from, Derek and these guys who were selling drum machines. We all know in the film, Frankie Knuckles got his drum machine from Derek. And so it's at that point that you're like, well, if drum machines are being transported from Detroit to Chicago, and this sound and music is being made from these drum machines, then there's this connection to house music, and Detroiters have played a role in this, beyond this surface transactional thing. But if I'm talking to Rick Wilhite, he'll give me a whole diatribe of how Detroit dance music actually is the pinnacle of all of this. Like it's not Chicago house, that it's actually Detroit dance music, and he'll explain it to me from a straight heterosexual perspective, and how really the gay involvement is not what pushes all of this over. So everybody has a story about how this music has evolved. The one that we're telling, though, does have all these elements, because they lend the way that we told the story lends more to the people who we talk to. And so again, Delano, Eddie Folks, Juan Atkins, Derek May, Kevin Saunderson, Santonio Eccles, Blake Baxter, like all these people tell the story about how the first time they heard it in many instances was from Ken Collier. So, you know what I'm saying? Like some people maybe are younger than 53 or 54. They may have a different POV on it, and that's understandable.
Totally. So, okay, well, let's see what we have to say. What's the next clip about in terms of Chicago? Let's check it out.
Please, thank you.
So-called house music was first made in the creators' houses, but it was also performed at clubs called the Warehouse and Powerhouse. However it got its name, it's one of the hottest things going.
Like this. Like this. Like this.
Derek's parents moved to Chicago, so he got to be kind of back and forth. Weekends he would visit his mom. He would call and tell me, yeah, man, I was going to the Warehouse and Frankie Knuckles and this guy Farley, I gave him records.
WBMX, Oak Park, Chicago.
Farley Jackmaster Funk.
He is something special.
Farley Jackmaster Funk was one of the main DJs in the Hot Mix 5. And he started playing No UFOs, man, like heavy.
BMX.
Actually, I owe a lot to Farley because he more or less kick-started the label because of the success of that record. In Chicago, man, the floor was still popular. Post-disco Chicago just kept going.
I couldn't convince Juan to come to Chicago. Juan, man, you got to check this thing out, man. I've heard this music on the radio. This is hot. He wouldn't come. So basically, that's where our music changed. My influence became more or less what was happening in Chicago than it was Kraftwerk or anything else.
Yes. This film it's such an archive for so many different communities, whether it's an archive for DJs, it's an archive for gay folks, it's an archive for Detroiters, it's an archive for like the folks who were at Paradise, it's an archive for tech heads, it's an archive. I mean, like, so congratulations for doing an incredible job and speaking to those intersections. Damn, no, I'm hyped. Now I'm like, what? Like, truly. One of the most important gifts to Black folks. I'm saying that from the heart. Like, you know how I feel about electronic dance music. So why don't we enter the quick world of like, because there's a, you know, there's a real interesting tension in this terminology, in this acronym EDM. What comes up for you when you think about EDM, which is an acronym for electronic dance music? What role does Detroit play in the minds of people when they hear that word?
Man, it's, you know, EDM is a word that, you know, it just, I'm trying to be kind, right? But
no, I don't need you to be kind. I don't need you to be kind.
I know, but it's a situation where I look at EDM as kind of the commodification of like Black culture with a white edge, right? With a white face.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of, and it's cool because I guess that's how younger people are able to latch on to it. Problem is it loses its historical foundation once we start putting all this stuff to calling it EDM, this baseball, this kind of hodgepodge of dance music. And so you have situations where, you know, Resident Advisor, Mix Mag, like all of these kind of businesses, corporations come in and they're able to kind of dictate kind of what the narrative is. So so I look at EDM as almost like a way that people have been able to kind of change the narrative and change the history. And I understand Calvin Harris is dope for people. That's dope for people, for them, right? But his history, his house is based on a lot of other growth and a lot of other things. So it's just, I mean, the resident advisor, the way that they, the way that they personally kind of went after the film and kind of like tried to destroy the film. So it's like EDM for me is kind of like those people that don't want this story told, that they call this music Detroit techno. That's EDM because it's techno. And this is where it started. Like there is no, Cologne. There might have been something happening in Frankfurt or Cologne, but it wasn't this. And it had and whatever soul it didn't have, lack of soul that it didn't have is the reason why we don't know about it. You know, that it was
totally.
You know what I mean? Like, so I just, when you EDM, it's almost like it's the fake out, you know, of kind of what this music is, you know, just the way that corporations, Vice, the way that these Red Bull, like the way that they all came in and kind of used dance music culture to elevate their platforms and put these other faces on it, and then like sell you a 15-minute or a 20-minute look into Detroit like it's the real deal. Like, yo, man, that ain't what this is, or that's not how I see it. And so EDM for me is one of those words that kind of they lessen our historical impact on this music, on this culture, and I try my best to not use it. You know what I mean? And not these companies. You've got to just hit something for me that's just like, yo, it's the corporate aspect of it, you know.
It's also a plantation aspect of it, right? Like I'm not trying to be kind because we're talking about the political economy of Black music. We're not talking about them just elevating their platforms. We're talking about them building generational wealth, as they did with blues, as they did with jazz, as they did with hip hop, like where we look at these plantation relationships, even with the use of the word masters and who owns some of those original tapes, and you know what it means to kind of deal with the aftermath of cultural extraction. But anyway, Calvin Harris's real name is Adam Wiles, and I think it's important. And I think it's important because he was clear and honest about the fact that he decided to use a pseudonym that sounded Black so that he could sell the music, right? Like, so now we're talking about deliberate whiteface and whitewashing, and we're talking about millions of dollars attached to it. So, listen, I feel the same kind of energy when I think about, you know, Elvis, not so much Eminem, which is deep, although there's a racialized, undeniable aspect to that. But like, as a matter of fact, Elvis and Eminem have more in common than probably Adam Wiles, who I refuse to call Calvin Harris. But like, in that they grew up with Black folks, next door to Black folks. You were in 7th Mile, dude. You know, Eminem was in the 8th Mile. Like, I get it, right? Still, we know that race matters and how they are elevated. And the other thing about this film that I want to, really, really highlight is the fact that it includes the role of Black women as co-creators of sound in Detroit. And so you feature, Stacey Hot Wax Hale is in it. And I just want to shout out some of the Detroit DJs, Minx, Kelly, the late Kelly Hand, Remarkable. There are so many Black women that are intricate, including the producer of this film, right?
Jennifer Washington.
Yes, right.
Paris Gray, Jennifer Washington. Those are both voices that we have.
Yes. And so the film does an excellent job of making sure that, you know, Black women are part of the story. So thank you for that as well.
No, thank you. And remarkable Minx, you know what I mean? DJ Holographic, you know, just
Shout
all
out.
of them. Yeah, for sure, you know.
But listen, we have less than a minute left. This is what I want to know. Where the hell can people find this film? Where can it be found? Where can it be seen? Where is it?
You know, the film right now is still on the film festival circuit. That's how we kind of play theaters and things around the country, around the world, actually. Over the next few weeks, we'll be in, we were just in Amsterdam, or we were in the Netherlands yesterday. We'll be in Detroit at the end of the month, the 20, I want to say, let me bring that up. We're at the 26th, and we're in Russia in June. We're in Brazil.
Yes.
We're in Sao Paulo in June. We also do Cologne in June. So really June, next month, we're around, we're in Europe. We're in South America for the first time. We're doing Canada. We do Montreal on May 15th. So the film is moving through the film festival circuit. This will be our second year on the circuit. And really, until we can get licensing, this is where we'll be until we can get on television. But, you know,
I appreciate it.
Yeah, lastly, the point you made earlier, though, about like EDM and white folks and things like that. It's a gentleman by the name of Richie Houghton in our film. And he was kind enough to allow us to kind of tell his story in a way that you can kind of see the connection of like how this music influenced other countries, other worlds, and how people took it and went their own way.
Who is that? The white Canadian who was in Windsor?
Yeah, Richie Houghton. And like we went to film him, we filmed him in Cape Town. We was in Africa, and he's telling the story about the Black Detroiters that he learned the music from. But the cats in Africa don't know, you know what I mean? Like those guys should have been there, but Richie is there representing
exactly
the culture, and that's one thing I will say that I love about him is that he represents the culture and he tells it straight.
Okay, well that is, we are super excited. Maybe you will consider allowing, you know, CCCADI to host the film screening, and maybe you'll come back in person, and then like, you know, like, because it's dope that it'll be played next month because that's Black Music Month. I mean, it's just a whole lot of stuff that can happen. But right now in front of everyone, I want you to say, yes, you are going to bring that film to New York and screen it.
Please. I would love to do that and love to come to the center and show the film and have a discussion. You know, I think it's definitely something in the Caribbean culture and Black culture that we can see this synergy of it. Like there is a connection to early dance hall and early stuff, like the drum, like again, Norman Anderson, the gentleman took the picture, you know, in London, you know, So yeah, there's connections there, and I'd love to share it with you guys, and I'd love to come to New York again and show this film.
That's amazing, family. We really, 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 really appreciate your time. You have done something, you guys, you and the crew and everyone, you've done something important. And so we are lucky to be part of it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Shout out to you as you travel and move through festival months this summer. We appreciate you, family. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you. I'll be seeing you soon.
Yes, fam.